The young girls at a girls-only ballet boarding school start showing up pregnant one by one, but the truth they discover during the investigation surprises everyone. Aurora Institute was in the middle of the city, surrounded by tall fences, iron gates, and a silence that felt like it would never end. The sky there always looked grey. The sun came out, but never strong enough to warm your shoulders. It felt like time there was different, slower, harder. Headmistress Elizabeth walked down the main hallway with her hair tied in a perfect bun, her ballet shoes tapping on the polished wooden floor with a dry, almost rhythmic sound. There were no smiles, no talking out of turn. Silence was an unwritten rule, and no one dared to break it. Elizabeth had been a star in the past. Her face had been on theatre posters, dance magazine covers, TV shows, but an accident during a rehearsal, a brutal fall on stage, ruined her ankle. She never danced again. Since then, she put all her passion, her pain, and her pride into the Aurora Institute, which she built from scratch, using prize money and sponsorships. A place where, as she said, discipline shapes talent, and talent beats time. There, girls aged 12, 13, 15, up to 24 lived far from their families, cut off from the world. It was almost like a military school for the girls to learn about respect, hierarchy, and responsibility. No phones, no internet. Visits were rare and supervised. They slept in white rooms with neatly lined beds, perfect sheets, and lights out at 9 o'clock sharp. They woke up at 5. They stretched with empty stomachs, took classes with bleeding toes, and no one cried. Crying was weakness. Elizabeth watched everything. She knew every wrong step, every hesitation in the eyes. She could spot bad posture from 20 meters away. She didn't yell. Her power came from her stare, cold, direct, unbreakable. When she walked into the rehearsal room, the air changed. The sound of the piano became sharper. The girls' spines straightened, as if fear itself was pushing their bones upright. But there was a hidden side to that woman. At night, when everyone was asleep, Elizabeth would walk alone on the empty stage. She touched the curtains with her fingertips, closed her eyes. Sometimes she danced a few short steps, like she was trying to remember who she used to be, and she always stopped at the same spot on the floor, the place where she had fallen years ago. She stood there waiting, like she hoped for some kind of answer, but nothing came. She believed, with all her heart, that she was doing the right thing, that keeping those girls safe from the world was an act of love, that art only came from pain and sacrifice. And that outside of that, there was only distraction and failure. At Aurora Institute, the girls learned to dance like learning to breathe. They also learned to stay quiet, to hide, to endure, because their bodies didn't belong to them. They belonged to the dance, and the dance didn't allow doubt. Morning rehearsal had started like any other. The studio was cold, and the smell of waxed floors mixed with the sound of the piano. The girls were doing pliés and stretches, eyes fixed on the mirror, trying to hide the tiredness in their muscles. Teacher Allison watched them all closely, walking back and forth, arms crossed, with a tight feeling in her chest, the kind only someone who cares too much knows. Ashley was one of the most dedicated. She stood out in theatre performances, never complained, never looked away. But that morning, something was wrong. From the moment she came into the room, she seemed strange. She walked slower, eyes a bit dazed, breathing short. She tried to hide it, but Allison noticed. At some point during warm-up, while the other girls were getting ready for Adagio, Ashley stopped in the middle of a move. She put her hand on her stomach, bent forward and ran, stumbling backstage. Allison dropped everything and followed her. She found Ashley kneeling in a corner, breathing heavily, her face as pale as paper. She had just thrown up. "Ashley, what is it, my love?" Allison knelt beside her, touching her forehead with the back of her hand. "You're freezing. You're shaking." I'm okay, miss," Ashley whispered, her voice weak like she was far away. "You're not okay. Did you eat something bad? Are you running a fever?" Allison looked into the girl's eyes and for the first time saw fear. It wasn't just nausea, there was more. A strange, heavy silence that Ashley didn't know how to break. I don't know. I swear I don't. Wasting no time, Alison pulled her phone from her skirt pocket and called the headmistress. Elizabeth's voice answered on the other end, sharp and precise. What is it? It's Ashley. She's not well, pale, she threw up, can't stand. You'd better come. Where are you? Backstage, main studio. I'm coming. Alison hung up and looked back at the girl curled up in the corner. Stay calm, okay? I've called the headmistress. We'll take care of you. Ashley nodded slowly, trying to take deep breaths. There were tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. That hurt more than the sickness. It was like something was wrong inside her, not in her body, but in her soul. And even she didn't know what it was. Elizabeth arrived less than 2 minutes later, walking fast, face firm as always. When she saw Ashley on the floor, she gently knelt beside her. What happened? I don't know, headmistress. I swear, I just woke up like this. Elizabeth looked at Alison, then back at the girl. We're going to the hospital, now. Without waiting for an answer, she called a driver, gave short, clear orders. In minutes, Ashley was in the school's official car, wrapped in a blanket, with Alison beside her, holding her hand. As the car went down the hill towards the city, Elizabeth, sitting in the front, looked into the rear-view mirror. Her eyes met Ashley's for a second, and in that moment she felt a shiver she couldn't explain. Something was wrong, very wrong. The hospital was 40 minutes away from the institute, an old building with greenish walls and a strong smell of alcohol in the corridor. The car had barely stopped when Elizabeth got out, quickly opening the back door. Alison was holding Ashley by the waist, who could hardly walk on her own. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked sunken, as if she had cried all night, even if she hadn't. It's going to be okay, all right? Alison whispered in the girl's ear, trying to give comfort she didn't even know how to keep. They went straight to the triage. The nurse, seeing the situation and knowing they were from the well-known Ballet Institute, let Ashley go in first. A few minutes later, they were in a small room with beige walls and a narrow examination bed. The doctor, a woman with tied-back hair and an experienced look, examined Ashley calmly. She asked simple questions, wrote everything down on a paper, and asked for tests. Then she turned to Elizabeth with a serious expression. She has low blood pressure, strong nausea, dizziness, but what caught my attention the most, she hesitated, is the kind of nausea, the frequency. I'm sorry to ask, but is there any chance of pregnancy? The silence that filled the room felt like a sharp slap. Elizabeth widened her eyes. She took a step back, as if she had heard something absurd. Pregnancy, she said, almost laughing, but the laugh didn't come. Doctor, this girl lives in a women's boarding school, under 24-hour surveillance. No contact with anyone from outside? That's impossible. The doctor took a deep breath. I understand, but the body doesn't lie, and it's my duty to consider every possibility. I've already asked for a beta HCG test. Let's wait for the result. Elizabeth crossed her arms, saying nothing. But inside, everything was spinning. Her head was pounding. Her throat was dry. Impossible. Impossible. The word kept turning in her mind. Ashley, lying on the bed, stared at the ceiling, unmoving. Her hands were shaking slowly on the sheet. She didn't speak. She didn't ask anything. She looked absent, like she was floating outside her own body. Do you want to tell me something, Ashley? The doctor asked in a calm voice. She shook her head, slowly, without expression. Are you sure? Alison insisted, now sitting beside her, holding her hand. You know you can talk to us, right? Ashley closed her eyes. Only a murmur came out. I didn't do anything. Elizabeth watched from afar. The doctor's words still echoed inside her. Pregnancy, it was ridiculous, even offensive. That place, Aurora Institute, had been built exactly to avoid this, to protect those girls from the world, from risks, from mistakes. Minutes later, the result arrived. The doctor came back with the envelope in her hand. She looked at Elizabeth, then at Ashley, and then she spoke. The test came back positive. Elizabeth froze. The room felt small, tight. It was hard to breathe. For a moment she thought she was going to faint. "That can't be right," she said, barely above a whisper. "You must have mixed up the test. It's not possible." Elizabeth looked at Ashley. That fragile girl with a sweaty face and lost eyes was now someone else. Not a student, not a ballerina, but a living question no one could answer. And there, in that hospital room, the floor seemed to open beneath the director's feet. Because there was no explanation. And if there was no explanation, then something somewhere was broken. And maybe, just maybe, she was losing control. The doctor, with the calm look of someone who had seen it all, turned on the ultrasound machine and asked Ashley to lift her shirt slowly. She obeyed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, afraid to look at anyone. The cold gel touched her belly and a chill went through her whole body. "Will it take long?" Elizabeth asked in a tone that tried to sound firm but was shaking inside. "Just a moment," the doctor replied, focused. The sound of a heartbeat filled the room. Small, fast, alive. "Here it is," said the doctor, pointing to the screen. "The fetus is healthy, around 12 weeks and 2 days. Ashley slowly turned her face. She looked at the screen like someone seeing a stranger in the mirror. "That's really inside me?" she asked, almost whispering. "Yes, it is." The doctor turned down the volume. "And it's already quite far along." The silence that followed was thick. It felt like you could touch it. Elizabeth swallowed hard. She tried to stay upright, but her eyes were searching the floor for some answer, some mistake, some escape. "Ashley," she said without looking at the girl, "tell me the truth. Did this happen with someone? Were you forced? Did someone touch you? Tell me now. I need to know." Ashley took a while to answer. She blinked slowly. Her chest was rising and falling heavily. And then, looking straight into Elizabeth's eyes, she spoke with the clearest voice she could. "No, I've never been with anyone, never with any man. I swear on everything." "Sweetheart, that doesn't make sense," Allison said, trying not to sound nervous. "We believe you, but it's just that for this to happen, you have to—" "I know," Ashley interrupted, her voice breaking. "I know what it takes to get pregnant. But I'm telling you, I don't even know what it would be like." The tears came suddenly. She tried to hold them back, but broke down right there, lying down, with her belly still covered in gel, the heartbeat still echoing softly in the room. She cried with her face turned to the side, curled up like a child who had the world pulled out from under her. Elizabeth stayed still. Inside, her heart was beating out of rhythm. She wanted to scream, to shake her, to question, but there was nothing to say. And more than that, something in the girl's pain, so raw, so defenseless, broke something inside her too. The doctor wiped the gel off, turned off the machine and left, respecting the silence that was left behind. When they were alone, Elizabeth came closer. For the first time, she knelt beside the student. She looked into her eyes, already swollen, already red. "Ashley, if you're hiding something, anything at all, this is the time. I'm not here as a director. I'm here as a woman, as someone who needs to understand what's happening." The girl just shook her head through sobs. "I'm not lying." And in that moment, even without understanding anything, Elizabeth believed her. She didn't know how it was possible, but she knew how to see truth in someone's eyes. And Ashley was telling the truth. It was impossible, but it was real. And that made everything even more frightening. The car came back slower than on the way there. The road felt longer, and the sky was starting to close in. Allison held Ashley's hand in the back seat, but no one said a word, not even a sigh, not even a thought out loud. Elizabeth sat in the front seat, staring out the window, but her mind was somewhere else. When they reached the gate of Aurora Institute, the guard opened it without question. He recognized the car, like always, but something was different in his eyes. Maybe he had noticed the silence inside the car, or Ashley's pale face. As they got out, Elizabeth gave firm orders. "No one says anything to anyone. Not to a student, not to a teacher, not to a cleaner." Allison nodded quietly. "Ashley will rest in the infirmary room, and she'll stay there. Food, clothes, everything will be brought to her. No visits, no questions. "Can I stay with her for a bit?" Allison asked carefully. "No, I need you to stick to the routine. If anyone asks, say Ashley has a strong migraine, that she needs rest." Ashley, pale and still shaking, was taken quietly through the back. None of the students saw, no one noticed, and those who did pretended they hadn't. The infirmary was in a forgotten corner of the building. A small room smelling of disinfectant, an old iron bed, and a window facing the backyard where no one walked. Elizabeth checked everything herself. She left a trusted worker to care for the girl, a quiet cleaning lady who had worked there for years, almost invisible. "I don't want gossip," Elizabeth said firmly. "Just take care of her 3 meals a day, nothing more." "Yes, ma'am." Before leaving, Elizabeth stopped at the door. She looked at Ashley, lying down, facing away. The girl didn't ask for anything, not water, not answers. She just wanted to sleep or disappear. That night the institute went on as usual. Dinner at 6, lights off at 9. But inside Elizabeth's head everything was boiling. She walked the halls in silence, the sound of her heels echoing like hammers in her soul. She passed by classrooms, looked out the windows, and everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Something was hidden, something that made no sense at all. In her office, she sat at her desk. She turned on the lamp and pulled out Ashley's file. She looked through medical notes, her history, even the letters she exchanged with her parents, all read and checked before reaching the girl's hands, as per the rules. Nothing, no mistakes, no secret notes, no clues. She put her hands on her face. For the first time in a long time, she felt lost, like she had failed to protect what she thought was safe. That night she didn't sleep. She only thought. Who else knows about this? Who else could be involved, she whispered to herself. Only one thing was certain. No one could find out. Not the students, not the families, not the press. Aurora Institute was more than a school. It was her legacy, the last thing keeping her going. Ashley was pregnant. That was a fact. But how and why was still locked in a mystery that only Elizabeth could and had to solve, alone and fast, before everything fell apart. It was only 3 days. 3 days where Elizabeth tried to keep the Institute's routine just as always, precise, silent, untouched. Ashley stayed isolated, quiet, lost in a kind of emptiness no one could reach. The other students, even without knowing anything, started walking more softly. It was like the very air in the boarding school had changed, heavier, tenser. On the morning of the 4th day, during warm-up in the mirror room, Allison noticed first. Mary, one of the strongest students, was sweating too much, even with the cold air, and her steps were offbeat. She tried to hide it, but something about her body seemed strange. Her hand on her stomach, her weak breathing, her eyes avoiding the mirror. "Mary, are you okay?" Allison asked, stopping the exercise. "I'm just a bit dizzy," she said, looking pale. Right then, the girl next to her, also named Mary, stumbled. She put a hand over her mouth, ran to the toilet and threw up. "My God!" Allison whispered, unable to hide her shock. Elizabeth was called again. And there she was, once more, facing 2 trembling girls, pale, with the same symptoms as Ashley. Cold hands, sudden sickness, a fragile look in their eyes. 2 girls who, until then, were examples of discipline and dedication. "This can't be happening," Elizabeth said, unable to control the anger, the fear, the confusion. "This isn't happening." But it was. Without wasting time, she took them to the hospital with Allison. The same questions, the same shocked looks from the medical team, and finally, the same tests. Positive beta-HCG twice, and once again, almost 3 months pregnant. Mary cried quietly in the hallway. Mary shook. When Elizabeth asked if they knew what was going on, both answered at the same time, desperate, "We didn't do anything." "I swear, headmistress, I swear to God," Mary repeated, almost shouting through her tears. Mary shook her head, unable to form sentences. Just tears, sobs, and a look begging for help. On the way back to the institute, Elizabeth didn't say a word. She just stared out the window at the road, her fingers trembling in her lap. Every bump on the road felt like it hit inside her chest. 3 girls, 3 students, 3 identical stories, and no explanation. When she arrived, Elizabeth went straight to her office and locked the door. She walked in circles, her breathing stuck, like there was no room left in her own body. "How?" she whispered. "How did this happen here? Inside here?" At Aurora Institute, no men were allowed in. It was one of the oldest and strictest rules. The students' fathers were received in an outside room with no access to the dorms. Suppliers dropped everything at the gate. Technicians, plumbers, any man who needed to enter was watched, escorted, scheduled ahead of time. Even the gardeners were contractors and only came once a month. Everything was controlled, watched, sealed. Elizabeth grabbed the visitor log from the last 3 months. She checked every name, every hour. No holes, no gaps. Whatever was going on didn't make sense. It was like something impossible was happening again and again, and now it was no longer possible to pretend it was just a one-off case. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't carelessness. It was a real mystery, and more frightening than she could have ever imagined. The clock showed 7:30 in the evening when Elizabeth sent for the 3 of them. The hallway was dark, and the silence was so thick you could hear the soft creak of the wood under their feet. Allison went to each one herself. She knocked gently on the doors and whispered, "The headmistress wants to speak with you now." Ashley, Mary, and Mary entered the office one by one. They sat in silence on the 3 chairs in front of the desk, all with hunched shoulders, eyes down, the same fear in their chests. The 3 looked smaller than they really were, girls inside the shells of women. Elizabeth took a while to speak. She stayed standing still behind her chair, staring at the students. Her eyes weren't hard like usual. There was something else, a mix of pain, anger, disappointment, and fear. "I'm not going to repeat myself," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the air. "I need to know, and I need to know now. What's going on?" The 3 stayed quiet. Mary was pressing her hands together in her lap. Mary bit her lip until it bled. Ashley just took deep breaths, trying not to cry. Three girls. 3 stories exactly the same. And you all swear nothing happened, that you didn't see anything, that you don't remember anything. Elizabeth stepped closer, almost whispering, "That's not normal. That's not possible." "We don't know, headmistress," said Mary, her voice shaking. "I swear, I don't know how it happened. I didn't do anything wrong." "Me neither," murmured Mary. "I don't even know what to think anymore." Ashley started, but her voice cracked. She took a deep breath and tried again. "Every day I wake up thinking it was a bad dream, but then it's there, inside me. I feel it, and I don't know where it came from." Elizabeth sat down slowly. Her own body felt too heavy to keep standing. "Did you sneak out? Is someone coming in here?" "No, Mom." Mary shook her head. "We only go from the dorm to rehearsal, from the classroom to the dining hall. Always the same. Always watched. No one came in," Mary added. "We would have seen. We would have told." Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment. She tried to breathe. She had anger stuck in her chest. Not at them, but at the unknown. At this madness, threatening everything she had built with so much sacrifice. "If this is some kind of joke, some pact, anything stupid, tell me now," she insisted. "It's not a joke," Ashley said, this time looking straight at her. "We're scared. We want to understand just as much as you do. We just wish this hadn't happened." A deep silence filled the office, the kind of silence that weighs more than any scream. Elizabeth looked at the 3 of them, one by one, and in their eyes there was only fear, shame, confusion. She stood up, walked to the window, opened it a bit to breathe. The night air came in cold. "You're going to stay on rest," she said at last, turning her back. "No one can know about this. No one. And I'll find out what's going on. Even if I have to turn this place upside down." The three nodded silently, and one by one they left the office. When the door closed, Elizabeth was alone, and for the first time in many years she felt something she couldn't even name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was something deeper, a feeling that told her, very quietly, that everything she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers. Elizabeth spent the whole night sitting in the dark office. She didn't turn on the lamp, didn't open the curtain. She just stayed there, with her head resting on her hand, eyes fixed on a thought that kept growing inside her. Something was happening, and it was at night. The Aurora Institute was known for its strict discipline, for its exact routine, but also for the deep silence of the nights. It was almost sacred. But now, that silence seemed to be hiding something, something that moved slowly without drawing attention. But that was there. The next day, without telling anyone, Elizabeth called a trusted technician, a simple man with few teeth and many wrinkles, who had done small repairs in the building since it opened. "I need you to install cameras. Small, hidden ones, in the places that don't have them. I want them in the hallways, behind the dorms, near the dining hall, in the rehearsal rooms. Focus more on the outside. Everything." Elizabeth spoke quietly, looking firmly into his eyes. "No one can know, not even the teachers. No one. And just in the access areas, no need for more private places like bathrooms, just hallway cameras to see who goes in and out. All right? I want all the paths watched." He just nodded and did the job with the care of a watchmaker. The cameras were placed high in corners, hidden in light fixtures, behind plants, even inside wall clocks, all without a single wire showing. Elizabeth watched everything closely, taking notes, checking angles, testing the sound. That same night, she went to bed later. Deep down, she couldn't sleep. She stood in her room watching the digital clock change numbers. After 2 o'clock, she went down to the office alone, turned on the computer screen and started watching. First night, nothing. The dining hall, empty. The hallways, dark. The dorm, silent. Nothing out of the ordinary. Second night, the same. Some girls got up to use the bathroom, then went back. No strange noises, no suspicious movement. But on the third night, something changed. It was past 2:40 when Elizabeth saw, on the west hallway camera, a figure come out of the dorm. It was Ashley. She walked slowly, with short steps, not looking to the sides. She wore a light nightgown and bare feet. Elizabeth held her breath. Right behind her, Mary appeared. And then Mary, one by one, silent, eyes down, not saying a word. But they weren't alone. Other girls were leaving too. 9, 10 girls, all going in the same direction, not looking at each other as if they were being led by something bigger than them. Elizabeth clicked to change the camera, her heart racing. She saw the girls go through the entrance hall, down the gallery corridor, up the small side stairs, and disappear as they entered the main theater. She paused the video, stared at the screen with wide eyes. There were no cameras inside the theater. There never had been, and there was no exit, just the entrance they used, out of tradition, out of respect for the founder who said, "Art needs freedom, even in mystery." Elizabeth leaned back in the chair, her face cold. "What are you doing in there?" she whispered to herself. She rewound the video, watched it again. The same girls, the same order, the same silence. No one seemed awake. It was like they were in a trance. Elizabeth felt a chill go up her back. She slowly closed the computer. That was more than rebellion, more than teenage curiosity. There was something there, something beyond logic, beyond control, and maybe beyond reality. She looked at the theater door, through the window of her office. It was locked, but maybe not for everyone. Elizabeth stood still in front of the heavy theater door, like someone staring at an old tomb. The cold of the early morning still clung to her skin, and the whole hallway was filled with a silence that seemed to listen. She already knew that door. She had passed through it hundreds of times. The theater was sacred inside Aurora Institute. It was the first space ever built, even before the dormitories. The founder, a strict and visionary ballerina, had declared, "The stage is the only place where the soul must be naked." she used to say, and that rule was never broken by anyone. But now, with everything that was happening, Elizabeth felt that this silence was hiding something more. It wasn't just a place for art. It was a hiding place, a mystery kept behind red curtains, switched-off lights, and creaky floorboards. She took a deep breath. She touched the cold iron handle but didn't turn it. Her whole body hesitated, because entering that room at that moment wasn't just about opening a door. It was about crossing a line, breaking a promise that had held up the Institute for decades. But what if it was there? What if the answer no one could find was right behind that door? Elizabeth took a step back. She stood there, still, her heart beating fast. Images from the night before ran through her mind like an old tape. The girls leaving quietly, eyes down, bare feet, all of them going in there, all of them walking into the one place she wasn't allowed to see. She tried to think clearly, tried to convince herself it could be something else. A harmless detour, a silly game, but it wasn't. She knew, she felt it. Something deeper was going on. Deep in her mind, an old memory appeared. The first time she stepped on that stage, she was 12 years old, the same age as many of those girls now. She danced while shaking, scared. But there was something there, something magical, as if the floor itself breathed with her. It was beautiful, but also frightening. "You came back, didn't you?" she whispered to herself, resting her forehead against the wooden door. She stayed like that for a few seconds, her heart tight, eyes closed. Her soul split between fear and the duty to protect those girls, even if it was too late. The next night, the clock showed 2:20 when Elizabeth knocked on Alison's bedroom door. She didn't need to say anything. She just looked, and Alison understood. She grabbed a coat, put on her shoes, and followed silently. They walked through the dark hallways, their steps soft, their hearts racing. They hid behind the curtain in the gallery with a view of the hallway that led to the theater. And there, they waited. It didn't take long. First came Ashley, then Mary, and 3, 4 more. In total, 9 students, a silent line of shadows, walking as if they were obeying a call. "Are they awake?" whispered Alison, a lump in her throat. "I don't know," replied Elizabeth, tense. "But they're not dreaming." The girls walked past them without noticing. Elizabeth and Alison followed behind, slowly, staying hidden, until all of them disappeared through the heavy theater door. Elizabeth waited a bit longer, counting the seconds. Then she opened the door as carefully as possible. Inside, it was almost completely dark. Only the moonlight coming through the skylight painted the stage with a faint silver light. The air smelled of old wood and dust. Everything was still. The curtains were closed, the seats empty, no sound, no movement. But Elizabeth knew something was there. "There's no one here," said Alison, taking a few steps forward. "They vanished." "No, they're here." Elizabeth looked around at every corner, every shadow. "Listen." And then they heard it, a low sound, long, like a distant, muffled singing. It came from behind the stage, behind the old backdrop, a huge painting on thick fabric showing a forest. It had been there since the Institute was founded. It had never been changed. Elizabeth walked towards the back. Alison followed her, heart pounding. As they got closer to the backdrop, the sound became clearer. It was like someone murmuring something, words that made no sense, almost like a song. "There's someone there," said Alison, frightened. "There really is." "Help me," Elizabeth asked, pulling one side of the fabric. Behind the backdrop, old boxes, broken set pieces, torn cloths, a pile built up over decades, and then a creak, sharp, short, like wood being forced. Elizabeth turned toward where the sound came from. Between 2 old shelves covered with sheets, there was something. A strange rectangle on the wall with a different kind of dust. Alison pulled one box. Elizabeth pushed another. There it was, a door, short, old, made from the same wood as the floor, camouflaged. You could only see it if you looked really closely. Elizabeth tried to open it. A strong, moldy smell came out. It was a tunnel, narrow, with stone steps, dark like a night without a moon. "Do you really want to go down there?" Alison asked, her voice shaking. Elizabeth didn't answer and took the first step. Alison followed, holding her breath. The tunnel was damp and narrow, with an uneven stone floor that made every step hurt her feet. Elizabeth walked in front, steady, but her racing heart showed the storm inside her. It felt like each step took them not only deeper underground, but also closer to a truth she didn't want to face. "How long have we been walking?" Alison asked, out of breath. "About 4 minutes," Elizabeth answered without looking back. "But look at this." The corridor started to change. The walls, once bare stone, now had old bricks covered in graffiti, scribbles, half-finished phrases. Some had smudged black ink letters, others drawings of moving bodies, dancers, instruments, broken hearts. "This isn't part of the boarding school anymore," Alison murmured, touching one of the marks on the wall. "No, with how far we've walked, we're already outside the fences." Just ahead, the tunnel ended in a short staircase. At the top, there was an old iron door with rusty hinges open. They came out into what looked like a basement with a cement floor, stacked boxes, and old posters stuck to the walls. The smell was different: music, sweat, fresh paint. Above them, they could hear muffled voices, laughter, and music. They climbed another set of stairs up to a wooden door with a small window. Elizabeth looked through it and then froze. On the other side, a wide room full of mirrors, dim lighting, and more than a dozen young people rehearsing. They weren't students, they were artists, young, beautiful, wearing colorful clothes, tattoos, loose hair. Some played guitar, others danced. A guy with an intense look and stubble was drawing in a notebook in the corner. "This is, Alison tried to speak, but her voice stuck. "A music school," Elizabeth whispered. "Or rather, it used to be. It's been closed for years. It's around the corner from the institute." "So what are they doing here?" The two of them stood there, watching in silence. The artists didn't notice. They lived there like it was a refuge, a hiding place from the world. There was joy, yes, but also a strange feeling, like this space was a different world with its own rules. "Look over there," Alison pointed quietly. In the corner of the room, on a worn-out sofa, was Mary, lying down with her head on one of the guy's laps. He was stroking her hair gently. On the other side, Ashley was smiling at a girl with red hair who strummed a guitar. Mary danced barefoot, spinning to the sound of an improvised melody. Elizabeth was stunned. She stopped, swallowed hard. "They come here, every night. They're living." The word hurt. That was it. Elizabeth felt like she'd been punched in the chest. All the rules, all the fences, all the gates, and still the girls found a way out. A way to feel, to let go, to love. "It's not just rebellion," Alison said softly. "It's something else. They're looking for what they never had." Elizabeth was still looking through the little window. The tears, without her noticing, started to fall. Slowly, warm, silent. On the other side of that door, the girls weren't lost. They had just found a piece of the world that had always been denied to them. After seeing all that, Elizabeth didn't have the strength to go into the room. Not to shout, not to call, not to stop anything. She just stepped back. She gently closed the little door and walked back through the tunnel with Alison close behind. Neither of them said a word. But when they reached the darkest part of the path again, that bit between the theatre and the music school, Alison tripped over a pile of boxes covered with old cloths. Elizabeth helped her hold them, and that's when they saw, there, among the mold and dust, there was much more than just old stuff. There were clothes that weren't from the institute, colorful skirts, loose dresses, t-shirts with drawings. There was a scarf that smelled like cheap perfume, and a leather jacket stained with paint. And deeper in, a nearly falling apart cardboard box, full of folded papers. Elizabeth knelt down. She picked up the first envelope. She recognized the handwriting. "It's from Mary," she murmured. Alison looked shocked. Inside, there was a handwritten letter, blue ink, a heart at the end. "Today I found out I can smile without saying sorry." He played a song and said, "I don't need to be perfect." I cried. And he didn't try to fix me, he just hugged me. Elizabeth felt her breath disappear. She picked up another. From Ashley. When I'm there, dancing with no mirror, with no one correcting me, I feel free. For the first time I dance because I want to, not because someone told me to, and when he looks at me, I feel like my body is mine, only mine. There were more, many more. Notes, drawings, photos. Some taken with an old camera, others developed with white edges, showing real smiles, bare feet, closed eyes of people who dared to dream. There was one of Mary sitting on a concrete stair, with an open book on her lap, and a guy playing guitar next to her. She was smiling, really smiling. Alison sat down on the floor, looking at everything, unable to hold back her tears. They just wanted to live, she said, her voice breaking. Elizabeth stayed still. One of the papers fell off her lap. It was a drawing. Many bodies dancing in a circle, holding hands. In the middle, a sentence written in colored pencil. We just wanted to feel like we owned our own bodies. It hit Elizabeth like an arrow. She remembered herself at 15, with bleeding feet, dancing until she fainted, trying to please directors, judges, critics. She had never loved, never allowed herself to make mistakes, never felt the kind of freedom she now saw in the letters. Those girls weren't just running away, they were trying to survive. In the middle of the tunnel, between the past Elizabeth had built and the future the girls were chasing, everything became clear. The Institute, with all its rules, was shaping ballerinas. But it forgot that behind every body there was a soul screaming to be heard, and there, among dusty boxes, forgotten clothes, and hidden dreams, Elizabeth understood. They didn't want to run away. They just wanted to really live. The next morning, the main hall of the Institute was completely silent. The students were called one by one. They didn't know why. There were no screams, no punishments, but there was something different in the air. Something that came from Elizabeth's expression. She was there, standing in the center of the room, with Alison beside her. Her hands were steady, but her eyes looked tired. She looked at those girls as if she was really seeing them for the first time. Ashley, Mary, and 6 more girls sat in the front row, nervous, their hands restless, fear showing in their eyes. Elizabeth took a deep breath. She walked to the front and said, "I saw everything. I know everything." Ooh. A murmur ran through the group, but she raised her hand, asked for silence. "You won't be punished. I just want to understand why." The silence grew heavy. The girls looked at each other. Ashley closed her eyes, took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and with a shaky but firm voice she said, "Because we just wanted to feel like we owned our own bodies. We couldn't take just obeying anymore." She stopped. Tears were falling. Everything was rules. Everything was control. We woke up, ate, practiced, slept, and no one asked if it hurt, if we were scared, if we were happy. Out there, we danced because we wanted to. We loved because we chose to, not because someone told us to. Mary stood up too. "We didn't run away to be bad. We ran to remember we were alive." Mary added, "We just wanted to live." Elizabeth didn't reply. Her eyes were full. Her chin trembled. She tried to speak but couldn't. So she looked around, saw each face, each girl, so much like her, so many years ago, but so much braver. And there, in that hall, the most feared headmistress in the country cried. Not out of anger, not out of pain, but out of awakening. A few days later, a meeting was called. The mothers were invited. The teachers listened in silence. The rules changed. The pregnant girls weren't expelled. They were welcomed. They got support, medical, emotional, and space to keep dancing, in the way they could, at the pace they could. And more than that, the Institute opened its doors. Art classes, music, open workshops. The students could choose, create, make mistakes. For the first time, Elizabeth watched a performance where no one was trying to be perfect. They danced with soul, with life. At the end of that show, Elizabeth was in the audience, standing, clapping for real. Next to her, Allison smiled with shining eyes, and for the first time in a long while, the girls at Aurora Institute danced not to be seen, but because they were free. And now I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in Headmistress Elizabeth's place? Would you have the courage to listen, to change? And if you were one of the girls, would you have taken the risk for a little bit of freedom? Leave your thoughts in the comments and tell me how this story made you feel. I read everything, and if this story touched you in any way, hit the bell so you don't miss the next videos. There's a lot of powerful stuff coming. And hey, there's already a video on the screen with a story that made many people cry and rethink what really matters in life. Click now and get ready, because it's one of those that touches your soul.